Thank you, Ian. Lots of really important points there about well-being, which I'm certainly going to touch on. But great to be here. I practically got swept off the seafront walking around the corner. I literally walked around the corner and horizontal rain hit me, so I'm looking slightly bedraggled. But I'm delighted to be here. This is a really important forum, the University's HR Forum. There are a lot of different sectors that have varying degrees of connection, I suppose, in terms of HR communities. But just looking at this room, this has got to be one of the biggest and best connected sectors, which is wonderful, because there is a lot going on. And certainly from the CIPD perspective, I'm really keen that we support and enable these sorts of connections, share our knowledge, both from you and to you, and help to strengthen what you learn from each other, as well as what you can learn from outside the sector. So I'm going to talk to you today about what's going on in the world of work, what's happening in HR, what are the things and trends that are driving us. Just to briefly credentialize myself in your world, I sit on BPP University's board, so private, I think it was the first UK university, privately funded university to get degree awarding powers. As we know from the recent white paper, there are probably going to be a lot more of them. I also sit on the Open University Business School Advisory Board, and I'm a visiting professor at Lancaster University, and I talk to an awful lot of universities and business schools in particular, because of course the CIPD has a lot of connections with your world. We connect to your programs running HR, your master's programs in many universities, and accredit a lot of those. We also work a lot with your academics. We had an academic symposium last year. I've always been really keen to see that we connect better to the world of academia and that sort of world of research and into work. It's a big part of what we do. So we had a fantastic academic symposium last year in the Shard. Anybody from Warwick University? Warwick? No? Anyway, Warwick Business School have got a wonderful central London campus in the Shard, which is pretty cool. So we got a whole bunch of academics together, and as you know, with academics, it's always a bit like herding cats. But believe it or not, they seem to agree on quite a lot of stuff, which we were quite impressed by. And certainly, we were talking a lot about the kind of trends in work and what are they researching, and where do we share and connect and pass that knowledge through into practice as well. And then, of course, working with you all as HR practitioners. I mean, you're in an interesting world. I know you had Universities UK speaking out, Dame Julie. I mean, it's a lot of stuff happening. I mean, the whole white paper debate and the teaching excellence framework and the new office for students. And I think the higher educational system has tended to be able to more work without that sort of oversight. And we have to work a great deal with off-qual, because we also do apprenticeships and all these other things, and we work a lot with colleges. So we have to work in the off-qual system. And you probably know just how hard that is to work versus the somewhat more liberal QAA type environment that universities have existed in. But I think that world is beginning to change, a little bit more oversight, more expectation of outcomes of what universities produce, more discussion about teaching excellence, what does that mean? And of course the funding debate, which goes on, and indeed all the way through to more of the sort of market forces and how do they affect higher education, or is higher education somehow immune from that and always protected? I don't think there's any sector on the face of the planet that can be protected from market forces. So there's a lot going on in your sector, and what I hope to be able to do is to relate some of the thoughts that I've got on sort of future of work, and obviously for HR, a little bit to your world as well. And if I don't ramble on too long, which I have a bit of a habit of doing because I get rather excited, I will have some time for Q&A as well. So first of all, just to, not with, without spending 3 hours on this subject, but what are the big forces of change? And I tend to categorize them in three. You can get all very clever and have long shopping lists, but I tend to think about three big areas of change. The first is globalization and economic change. We do live in very uncertain times. You might have heard this expression that we live in a VUCA world. Anybody heard that expression? VUCA world? Anybody know what it stands for? It's volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Anybody know where that came from? It wasn't me, incidentally. Donald Rumsfeld. He of the known knowns, the unknown knowns, the known unknowns, and the unknown unknowns. Remember that? quote, which is a great quote, I think, because actually so much of life is about that. What you know, what you don't know, and what you don't know, you don't know. I mean, it's all of those sorts of things, and particularly in a more uncertain world. So he was describing a geopolitical environment in the 90s that had become very volatile and very uncertain. And it's informed a lot of thinking about the military and how they operate, about greater agility and adaptability and situational leadership and all these sorts of ideas. And when I first started to get interested in this stuff, my background, incidentally, was in big consulting. I worked at Accenture for many years. I got very interested in the notion of agility and adaptability and started to Google this stuff in the late 90s, early 2000s. And everything that came out was all about the Rumsfeld doctrine and about military thinking. And now we're talking about this stuff in the world of business. Because globalization does mean that things are very uncertain. In the old world where we sort of assumed that whatever we did in the West was brilliant and everybody else wanted to come to us, we were at the high end of the value chain, whether it was in education or commerce, that was the preconception. And the developing world, Asia and so forth, would come to us because we had the high value and we would then outsource things to them or whatever. It was about labor cost arbitrage. They could do things cheaper. And of course, that's changing. And it is changing in the world of higher education as well. Because we benefit hugely, as you know, from what I sometimes describe as Brand UK. Brand UK is a fantastic thing for British universities and education. Because when you think about some of the great things that people around the world recognize the UK for, almost top of the list is education. And they think of the United Kingdom as education and standards and quality and ethics and those sorts of things. We benefit from this as well as the CIPD, incidentally. We've opened offices in Singapore, in the Middle East, and everybody coming to us to say, a British chartered institution has got to be a good thing. And we want to be part of that, and we want to develop the profession internationally. But that world is also changing. We cannot assume that in the next 10 years that all the Asian students we've been importing from China and other parts of the world are necessarily going to continue. Because the educational system in those parts of the world is growing and developing. It's going to compete with us just like Chinese companies compete head-to-head with all of the British and Western global companies today. Some of the fastest growing global companies in the world are not in the West. They're in Asia. And incidentally, there's a lot we can learn from Asia. And one of my big themes about the world of work is we've always thought there's been an Anglo-Saxon model of business for far too long. And that Anglo-Saxon model of business is about rules, it's about processes, it's about command and control. It's not about humanity. It's not about people. And I plead guilty to this stuff. I mean, I worked in big consulting. We used to go process re-engineer everything. And somewhere in the middle of all of that would be a person. And then somebody was describing this to me the other day as we treated people like bad robots. A good robot does what it's told to do. You wire it in the instructions and it just does it. The trouble with people is they don't just do that, do they? They will do funny things, strange things. They don't always do what we want them to do. And we have created a world of a belief system that says, and the right way to manage people is you just keep on writing more rules. And that is not the way that you change behavior. And I'm going to talk a bit more about that. So all of this stuff basically says we've all got to be adaptive. Doesn't matter what sector we're in, we've got to be looking ahead. We cannot take for granted the things that we've taken for granted in the past. Things are changing, and they're changing at quite a pace. And as I say, they're affecting everybody. Clearly, a massive driver is technology. And not that I'm a sort of a TLA freak, three-letter acronym. VUCA driven by SMAC, I kind of like that, right? So SMAC. So technology, social media, and how that's impacting how people learn and connect and share, what informs movements of people in very, very different ways. The whole Arab Spring stuff wouldn't have happened without social media. Mobile, that we can access knowledge and content and people and communities anytime, any place, anywhere. Analytics, which is deep into what we have to do as a profession. How do you use data to give you more insight and knowledge? And that's been a long challenge for the profession. And we're doing a lot to work on that. And then cloud just basically says you can get stuff anywhere and anytime, any place. And a lot of stuff that I'm now seeing in terms of back office systems, HR systems, people are saying, put it on the cloud. Do you think the cloud is more or less secure than your data center? What do you think it is? Do you think it's less secure or more secure? No, the cloud is way more secure than the data center. Supposing somebody pulls the plug or bombs it or whatever. Data centers are not very secure. I mean, yes, you'll have dual redundancies and all these other things. But the cloud is way more secure. And a lot of people just think, oh, well, it's out there and I can't control it. So more and more stuff is going to go out onto the cloud. And that will reform and rethink what we have in terms of IT departments, amongst other things. So technology, huge, and then, of course, workforce and demographics. This is a whole subject all by itself. You know about Gen Z, right? You've got Gen Z coming into your universities now. The 18-year-olds are the leading edge of Gen Z. I've got 3 daughters, and I use them for social experiments frequently on discussion about generational stuff, because 2 of them are Gen Y and 1's Gen Z. And my Gen Y daughters think there's something wrong with my Gen Z daughter. They think she's completely obsessed by technology. She shouldn't think of it as technology. It's just she's totally obsessed. She has her phone, she has her iPad, she has her laptop. It's all going on at once. She's watching TV, all happening at once. You recognize this? And then I'll come in and say to her, stop watching Hollyoaks or some rubbish like that. I want to watch something serious like the football. And she said, you can't. I'm watching Hollyoaks. And I said, you can't be doing all those things, and you're texting and you're Instagramming and all these things. And I said, tell me what's going on Hollyoaks. And she'll say this, and this. She's tracked it at the same time as doing these other things. So some people talk about Gen Z being the true multitaskers. They are the digital native generation, that they are learning differently. They are genuinely much more of the self-taught learners, despite what we've done to them in the educational system. They still learn a lot from themselves. And again, my social experiment of one with my youngest daughter is when she did her GCSE maths, she literally took her textbooks and chucked them in the bin because she found a far better teaching course on YouTube. And she was watching these people explaining stuff like simultaneous equations, and she said, now I get it. And then she did economics A-level. She was off there Googling all sorts of stuff, and I'm interested in economics, so she was sharing stuff with me and saying, what do you think about this book or that book? And one of the books she gave me, interestingly, was a book called The Armchair Economist by Stephen Landsberg. And interestingly, you should read about economics, and I'll tell you why. So this book, The Armchair Economist by Stephen Landsberg, the first line of that book was the science of economics is about understanding how people respond to incentives. And I thought, good grief, I thought that was HR, right? And now we've got the whole world of behavioral economics, which is a really, really important field. Economics, interestingly, has paid more attention to the science of understanding human behavior than I think we have in business or in our profession. In brackets, discuss. Because I think it's true. If you read books, and you should read books like this, like Daniel Kahneman, who's read Thinking Fast and Slow. Anybody read that? Good book, right? Brilliant book. Daniel Kahneman has been a psychologist for many, many decades. He won the Nobel Prize for Economics because he was explaining to economists why and how people take decisions, how bias happens, how groupthink happens, all these sorts of things. And that's at the very heart of what we need to understand as well. So, as I said, the whole workforce demographic things, the younger generations coming in, the aging workforce stuff, you know the fastest growing segment of the UK economy in terms of age are the over 50s. That in the next 20 years we'll have double the number of over 60s that we got today. This is because people are living longer. And interestingly, we were a baby boom generation who are going to be living longer. We're reinventing retirement as well because we have to. Economically, we cannot sustain 30, 40 years of retired life without working. But it's also vitally important socially and all these other things. We had a session yesterday because we've just done some stuff on policy around aging and aging workforces with Ros Altman, who's the pensions minister, and wrote really, really good stuff on the implications of the aging workforce and how we had to think about that. So this is not just about the younger generations. This is about a whole demographic shift that's going on. And do you know why we've got this kind of bubble of older people, apart from living longer? This is because we haven't had enough babies. Right? You know, the average number, the birth rate across Europe has been around 1.5 or 1.6 for the last decade or two. It's so significant. This is on national agendas. This is on political agendas. I don't know if you remember this, but the former Prime Minister of Denmark, the one who was married to Neil Kinnock's son, actually started to talk about having additional national days holidays to encourage people to procreate. Right? And the most bizarre stat of all across Europe is which country has the lowest birth rate? Do you know? Anybody know? Italy. Italy! Any Italians here? Catholic country with Berlusconi as a role model. What's going on? But it's an extraordinary fact, and hence immigration is a vital part of a sustainable economy. Japan is the first developed nation on Earth that anybody can remember in recorded history to see its population starting to decline for the same reasons. Japan does not have a lot of immigration. And if anybody's been to Japan, it's a very, very homogenous society. A bit like Korea. It's really quite extraordinary when you go to these places and you kind of realize where your perceptions are. You walk into a McDonald's or a Starbucks or whatever, and you're only being served by Japanese people. And we're so used to, in our country, taxi drivers and all sorts of people from all around the world, vital ingredients to our economy. And I know Dame Julia talked about the Brexit, talking about uncertainty. I mean, Brexit, of course. But immigration is a vital part of our economy. And it is in part driven by some of these extraordinary demographics. So, as I said, those are the big three that I think of, and each one you can unpack all sorts of levels of stuff. But it is pretty profound. I'll just give you a couple of other quick thoughts on it. So, first of all, it is changing a whole bunch of things. We, at the CIPD, we've been talking about this for a while. I mean, since I started, just coming up almost for 4 years, it's pretty unbelievable. I said, we've got to get onto these subjects. And we talk about the mega trends, the changing nature of work. What jobs are we all going to be doing? Which is vitally important for a higher educational sector, which is, so what are you trying to build for the future? What's the workforce and the jobs and skills we're going to need for the future? Where are we going to work? What kind of workplaces? Who's on Uber? Who uses Uber? A bunch of you, right? How many taxis does Uber have and taxi drivers? None. Airbnb, one of the world's largest now hospitality companies, doesn't own any real estate. We're seeing these very different models of work emerging. In fact, Uber is now become a verb. Have you heard this? Uberization of work. All right? And it is because people can now work in a lot of very, very different ways. And it's become known, therefore, as the gig economy. Gig economy. In other words, I can do a gig. I don't have to be employed by anybody. I can just go through a brokerage system, be it Uber or anything else, or TaskRabbit or Elance, or lots of these sorts of websites. And you can just give your skills for a period of time for a particular job or task. And hence it's being known as the gig economy. We actually don't know how many people are employed in this way. We really don't, because the ONS and nobody else properly records it. Because we are still in a paradigm of thinking about work, which is about you are employed and you work for an organization, and that organization will take care of you. We're in that paradigm from a lot of the unions' perspective. Organized labor, organized work. We're certainly in that paradigm from a lot of employment law and policy and what we record and what we think is important. And yet all these things are changing under our nose. We estimate that between 15 and 30% of the workforce is now self-employed. A lot of your people in your sector are on things like 0 hours contracts, right? You have a lot of contractors in the higher educational system, and this is part of your workforce. And the interesting thing for us in HR is we haven't always thought about these people as part of our workforce. I was talking to one of the big banks yesterday, HR team at one of the big banks, and I was really challenging them on this and said, do you know how many contractors you've got working at this enormous bank of yours? And they said, no, not really. And I said, and incidentally, who recruits them? How do they end up in the organization? Do you know? Do they end up through HR? No, typically they end up through procurement. So we're talking a lot with the Chartered Institute of Procurement of Supply, because I want more data. I think now, through procurement functions, you're seeing almost more labor being procured than services and products. And yet we're not counting these people, and then we're trying to build organizations where we're worried about behavioral alignment and cultural alignment and all these other things. And we've got more and more of these people that we don't really understand. We've not recruited them in that way. We're often not training them, or we have our town hall calls and we get everybody together and tell them all about what's going on in the business, and all the contractors are outside the room. Does this sound familiar, any of this stuff? Because this is part of the changing world of work, and we have to get to grips with some of these things and see that the modern workforce, these are not short-term trends. Uber's not going to disappear. We're not going to suddenly say, oh, let's all go back and work for big organizations. If you ask young people, Gen Y, Gen Z, where do they most want to work? They do not typically want to work for large organizations. They want to work for small organizations. They want to be entrepreneurs. They want to start their own business. And why is that? Well, a bunch of reasons. One is that Gen Y and Gen Z, as we know, have a rather I-centered view of the world. Would you agree when you talk to your children about this stuff, right? The amusing thing to me about that is that When Gen Y first has started to appear, I talked to a lot of businesses and business leaders, and they were saying to me things like, can you tell me what's the problem with Gen Y? And I said, it's interesting you expressed it like that. What do you think the problem is? And they said, well, you know, they come into work and they have all these expectations and they expect to be coached and given feedback and told how great they are. And incidentally, not only have I got to deal with the Gen Y, I've got to deal with their damn parents too, right? You know, the phenomenon of helicopter parenting. You probably see it you must see it in the universities, right? Because we've certainly seen this in business. The parents are getting involved in recruitment. You know, my little prince or princess didn't get the job. Next thing, knock on the door from mummy or daddy saying, why didn't my little prince or princess get the job? Right? Or even into performance evaluations. And this phenomenon's been around for a while in the States. And they train recruitment managers and even line managers how to deal with parents as much as they have to deal with the individual. So whatever we think of Gen Y, we have to say, well, we brought them up. We brought them up. So yes, well, one of the phenomenon of them is that they're a little bit more I-centered. And we talk about this shift from collectivism to individualism. So it's more about the individual and not the collective. And if I want my voice heard, I will make my voice heard. I will use technology if you're not listening, right? We have things like Glassdoor. Are you familiar with Glassdoor? You may, I don't know if you have the same, do people write about your universities and what it's like to be employed at your university on Glassdoor? You do. And you're checking this stuff out, right? Yeah. Good, really important. You must check this out. I usually, whenever I go talk to organizations, I always check out Glassdoor. What are people saying about you? So Gen Y and Gen Z will tell you what they think, whether you want their opinion or not, right? And they don't want, therefore, to work in large organizations where they think they have no voice. And secondly, there's a lot of breakdown of trust, a lot. We are in a world now, if you're familiar with things like Edelman's Trust Barometer. Have anybody seen this? Edelman's Trust Barometer, yeah, Liv's seen it. So the trust has been going like this. It's a barometer that's looking at trust, asking lots of different people, what do they trust, who do they trust, what do they believe in? And the latest Edelman Trust Barometer, which was published earlier this year, talked about this massive and growing divide between what you might call the elite or the establishment and everybody else. Now that elite or establishment could be large corporations, it could be politicians, it can even be the media. Why do you think that Donald Trump, God bless him, is the nominee for the Republican Party of the United States? Never held office, talks a load of utter nonsense, but it is nonsense that a lot of people want to hear and believe in. Yeah, it's principles. It's a bit like Jeremy Corbyn, and this is not a political statement about Jeremy Corbyn. I mean, he did actually, and this is why I think he got the nomination, talked a lot about principles. He said, I believe in this, I believe in more fairness, I believe we should be creating better societies. You don't hear a lot of politicians talking about that kind of stuff. And people want to latch on to these ideas of what do you really, really stand for? What's your purpose? What principles do you stand for? And that's as true for organizations, it doesn't matter what you are in terms of organization, as it is for politicians and everybody else. So this is really profound stuff going on, and it does mean that we have to work hard, particularly in business, to attract and retain young people. And I think it would be the same in your world. Okay, the students are different, but your staff that you're recruiting. And what do they come to the university for? What's going to keep them there? And one of the things, unquestionably, is a better discussion and a better depiction, if you will, of what you stand for, what's your purpose, and what principles do you live by, and what are your values? And this is a really interesting discussion when you get into a place like financial services. So as I said, I was in two of the big banks yesterday. Barclays Bank, if you ever go into Canary Wharf, if you ever find yourself in Canary Wharf, you're probably lost, but anyway, if you do find yourself there, go into Barclays headquarters. You can just wander into the foyer. They've got these enormous signs. They're huge. They're 10 foot wide and about 6 foot high with their value statements. Integrity, stewardship, customer excellence, respect. I can't remember the fifth. And you're looking at all this stuff and you think, is that it? Interestingly, you go into the lifts and you got a description of the value statement. I was in somebody's office yesterday on the flip chart. They got their 5 value statements written down. Is that what it takes to change culture and get people to learn to value? No, not on its own, but at least it's a start. And what people are talking about in all these different sectors and all these different businesses is how do we restore trust, and we've got to have behaviors and cultures that reflect our values more consistently, and we've got to understand our purpose and are we delivering to that purpose. And I don't care what kind of organization you are, That is now more true than it's ever been. So just a few other quick thoughts on changing nature of work. I mean, so hashtag FOBO. Do you know what FOMO means? Fear of missing out. Do you know what FOBO is? Fear of becoming obsolete. Right? So look at this list. So you may know this. Anybody from Oxford University? So Osborne and Frey, two Oxford academics, did this in 2013, a very highly publicized study. There have been many others besides it, where they looked at all the jobs in the US economy. It's pretty much the same here. US economy, and said, good grief, 47% of those could be done by a computer. And this is why I think we're at an inflection point. Technology has been around for a while. You could argue that any jobs it's displaced have been replaced. So overall employment stats are roughly where they were before the global financial crisis. But this is different. I think a lot of people, me included, see this as an inflection point. Klaus Schwab, the founder of the World Economic Forum, has been using language like, we are about to hit the fourth industrial age. And the fourth industrial age is where technology, artificial intelligence really gets embedded in our world. And there's a whole new language emerging of put some verb or noun in front of bot. Have you heard about chat bots, for example? Chat bots are things that you and I are going to be talking to more and more when we call up a call center. It's going to be a machine that is interacting with us, but we wouldn't know that it was a machine. And you know what that test is called? The Turing Test. Alan Turing postulated back in whenever it was, the 40s and 50s, that at some point technology would reach a point where if you were interacting with a machine or a human being, you couldn't tell the difference. And that test has been passed. So chatbots, and there's a little interesting story about chatbots, because Microsoft have been one of the big ones promoting chatbots, because they think, we could get rid of lots of call centers, which are always rather problematic, and create better jobs for humans or whatever. So they launched their chatbot, and they said, let's put it out onto Twitter and see what happens. Did you read the story? It was hilarious. So they put this chatbot up onto Twitter, gave it a Twitter handle, told people that it was, they were kind of trying out their chatbot, and had to take it down about 24 hours later because it was becoming racist. Did you hear this story? And actually, that doesn't say so much about the chatbot. It says an awful lot about us. Because what people were doing was, having a laugh, I don't know, but they were kind of firing stuff at this tweets and using this hashtag or its Twitter handle, and firing all this commentary at it. And all it was doing is assimilating that commentary and playing it back. I mean, it's only an artificial intelligence engine, and it was becoming racist. So that says more about us than it does about the chatbot. Anyway, so all these sorts of cobots, the idea that we will work alongside computers that will enhance either physically or mentally what we do. And of course, computers now really can do, much what this shows, cognitive tasks. Anything that's a cognitive task, AI is more than capable of doing. And there are things like the growth of, there's a big international program called Roma, where they are capturing all the laws of the land, including all the employment laws and all the case histories, and putting it onto a big computer. I think it's IBM's Watson supercomputer. So that now, or in the future, as a lawyer, if I have a question, I will go to the computer and I've got all the laws of the land and all the case histories, and, well, isn't that great? But what do paralegals do? What do junior solicitors do? Where are they going to get their knowledge from? I mean, you've seen them, right? They're all tugging along these massive piles of paper, and they spend hours and hours in the office figuring out the case histories and what to back up their judgments with. Well, a computer's going to be able to do that way better. So what is the implication then for young solicitors or paralegals? Same thing emerging in the medical profession. That medical diagnosis is going to be better done by a computer than it will be a human being. And why is that? It's because human beings are bad robots. They have biases. And I don't care how good your doctor is, the doctor has a bias. Experiential bias. I've seen this before, I know what it is, it's that. Whereas a computer, if we design them right, are completely unbiased. So this is really profound stuff, and the most important point about all of this is if you look at technology today, I would contend that it has not been improving our lives largely in terms of work. A lot of it's de-skilled or disempowered us in the workplace. We have to work with technology much more closely because we cannot design a world where we're run by robots. It's up to us to design that future. And this is a vital, vital agenda for HR. I would say our muscle about developing organizations and designing jobs and progression routes, doesn't matter what sector you're in, has somewhat atrophied. We have not spent enough time on this. And in this world, we must. This is going to become one of the really core things that HR needs to do, is to work with technology to figure out what is the best balance between the human and the system. And actually, it's kind of back to the future, because I studied ergonomics at Loughborough University. Anybody from Loughborough? Yeah, anybody from Loughborough? Yeah, there we go. So I studied ergonomics, which I still teach as one of the courses, and I think it's still in the Faculty of Human Sciences, isn't it? Yeah. So ergonomics is about man-machine interface. How does the human work with the system? And that was in 1979 when I left university, and it's never been more relevant. Now, one of the things for us, therefore, to think about in all of this is also, what are we teaching our people? I mean, I don't know how much impact you have on this, but I'd love to see you as a profession in higher education have this kind of impact on what we teach students. We should be teaching way more people, I don't care what their discipline is, but particularly across things like management, science, and business, a lot more about the world of people. Not just the world of management strategy and marketing and product and financial understanding, but about the world of people. I was over in Ireland last week talking to the heads of schools across with Trinity College Dublin, and they were acknowledging that the trouble is each of these schools is very siloed. So we had linguistics and business, and we had chemistry and science and natural science and social science and all these others, and they're all very siloed. You're saying, well, actually what we need to prepare people better for the world that we're now moving towards is we need to share more across these disciplines. And I think this is a profound shift that's going to need to happen in education. And I do get, because I've had lots of these conversations with the educational system and government and so forth, that education is not just about preparing people for the world of work, but I think it should be preparing people for life, of which work is a major component. And a lot of the stuff that's going on in life is this. How do you work in a digital world? How do you understand this stuff? What's important to understand about people? What are the basics of, I don't know, managing your finances? I mean, as Ian said, one of the biggest issues we have in well-being today is financial well-being. The rollout of universal credit is dependent on people better understanding how to manage their finances. And yet students are coming out of university and they don't know how to do this. So if we can influence that agenda with our academic colleagues, we really should. We've got to find ways, I think, of educating more people about the realities of life, about technology, about people, about all these sorts of ideas, because they are part of our lives in ways that we've only begun to, in many senses, scratch the surface of. And then, of course, the workforce, as I said, who's the future workforce? Well, it's more diverse, it's different, it's working in different ways, more SMEs, more jobs, more career changes. It's no longer the job for life, it's the life of jobs. So here's another big thing for the educational establishment, which we were talking with Joe Johnson about recently. Lifelong learning. We're doing work also with Biz on understanding future skills and recognizing that in the world that we've been describing, with all this technology and changing jobs all the time and changing skills, is lifelong learning, or what some people in Biz call life course learning, is absolutely essential. And in the UK culture, we're not very good at this stuff. If you compare us to the Nordics, so Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Norway, they're way better at this. There's a much stronger cultural norm in that part of the world in particular to say that I don't finish my education when I'm 21. I never finish my education. And I'm going to re-educate and I'm going to go back to college. We have profoundly got to understand that paradigm. And we've got to think about the funding models that do this, and we've got to think about the educational system that better supports it. Education has got to be something we've got to think about much more for life. So that is another very big trend which we can absolutely influence through our profession, whether it's through you in the educational sector or us together with you, trying to influence government thinking and policy on this stuff. Because this is the world that we're now in. And then, trends in learning and development without overplaying. This is also, of course, another very, very relevant thing for the world in which you are supporting. How is learning changing? I said that, Gen Z in particular, the digital natives, are self-directed learners. And one of the phrases that we're using more and more, certainly in the corporate world, is the L&D function. What we've got to figure out is we're going to go to where the learners are learning. Go to where the learners are learning. And what is really interesting in all the trends of technology now, particularly with the younger generations, is they are not learning through our traditional means. I mean, if I'm an L&D function, I said, right, you all need to learn this, and I'm going to teach you that. Well, they may get something from that, but the majority of what they're learning is by learning on the job, and a lot of them are saying, I don't care what's in the learning curriculum, I've got a particular job, a particular problem I've got to deal with, and I'm going to go Google it. Just like I said, my youngest daughter, when she came to do a maths revision, said, forget the damn textbooks, I've Googled it. And you know your students are doing this, right? They're all sat there on their iPads, and they're challenging the lecturers about, well, you said this, but I've just Googled it, and I can find 4 other references that say you're wrong, right? This is really profound. And of course, MOOCs and all of that, there's a lot of debate in your world about, are MOOCs going to undermine or support? Right? And MOOCs are an amazing thing. We've developed some MOOCs as well. I'm sure some people from Open University, but Future Learn is a fantastic platform. And more people are saying, well, do I even need to go to university if I can learn all this stuff for free? But equally, universities are saying, well, yeah, but doing a MOOC is a great shop window to all the amazing stuff you could really learn if you came here, right? And this is a big debate as well. Are MOOCs good for higher education, or are they a threat for higher education? And all the kind of learning analytics and multi-platform learning, and of course, particularly with the digital native generation now entering our world, they're coming into universities and saying, well, if I can't access all this stuff, if you won't let me access things in lectures, or I can't get great internet coverage, or whatever it is, then I'm in the wrong place. If they come into work, they'll say the same thing. They do not tolerate, because they've grown up, but they don't think of this as technology, as I said. They've grown up with this all accessible. And then they come to education or work and find that they can't access this, they can't get onto that, they're prevented from doing this, prevented from doing that. And I think, what is this nonsense? And this is, so this is a big force of change. And how we embrace it in the world of learning, from education through into the world of work, is enormously important. So also, as Ian briefly touched on, I mean, the other reality of work, I mean, it is extraordinary. I talked about some paradigms of work that we've had for a very long time, but it is extraordinary when you look at the outcomes of what we've done. Is from an economic perspective, work is arguably not really working as it should. I mean, you've probably read about the endless debates about the productivity puzzle. You know that the UK is about 17th in the G20 for labour productivity. And the headline is that if the French didn't work on Fridays, they would still be more productive than us. And most people think the French don't work on Fridays anyway, right? So you think, what's going on with that? So this connection between understanding, this is where analytics becomes so important, understanding what outcomes are we creating for the inputs of labour that we're providing, which we've not been very good at measuring, particularly in a more knowledge economy. But also the social side of work, the human side of work. How have we ended up in a world where stress is the biggest source of absenteeism, that 1 in 4 people suffer from mental health issues, not entirely caused by work, but a contributor for sure, that there is insecurity financially, there is inequality financially, and unfairness financially, and that we're not utilising our skills and talents. I mean, the output of your universities are not being used effectively in the world of work. We have a big mismatch of skills. We've done a lot of this and challenged a great deal on some of the rhetoric that government's been talking about in higher education, which you might not want to hear me say. But we do not believe that having more than 50% of our young people going to university in this country is the right answer. Because we already have an enormous mismatch. And we have a lot of young people with a debt. The government itself estimates that 45% of young people will never get to the point of repaying their debt. Now, I get that university education, again, is not just about education, but it's got to be about an economic return as well. And there are other sources to get into work. Apprenticeships are being pushed very hard, as you know. Many of your universities are looking at things like degree apprenticeships, and you have to. We've got to find these more blended models. And we've got to find also better ways in work of designing work that makes better use of our skills. Because the OECD reckons that the UK, and this is one of our productivity issues, has around 20% of the jobs in the UK economy require no more than a primary school education. I mean, how can that be? No more than a primary school education. Even Slovakia, apparently about 8% of their jobs require no more than that. So this is why, as I said, I think the design of work and the design of jobs is a vitally important agenda for the future of HR. We've got to design work that's good for people. We've got to design work that's making the best use of their skills. And then we've got to understand it from the point of view of the outcome it's created. Not just the economic outcome, as I said, but we must understand that, but this stuff as well. Is it making people happier? Is it helping their well-being? Are they less stressed? I mean, who of you would say today you feel more stressed at work than you did 10 years ago? Who would say that? Oh, actually, if you were trying to think a bit of it, aren't you? A lot of people, when I ask that question, all hands fly up. Because, this is my point about, about technology not always having helped us. We're always on. We can't get away from the damn stuff. We're on holiday, we're getting texts and tweets and messages. And interestingly, when I say to people, get on Twitter, how many of you are on Twitter? No, that's not bad. I'd say all of you should be on Twitter. And don't worry that you've got to be on Twitter to express your innermost thoughts or the philosophy of the world or your views on Brexit. Interesting as I'm sure they are. But equally, don't tell me about what you have for breakfast because I'll immediately unfollow you. This is about a source of learning. I follow all sorts of people, from the Queen to Obama to the CIA to goodness knows who. It's a source of learning. But as I said, technology has not been freeing us up. In many ways, it's been almost overwhelming us. And nobody's written the rule book for this stuff. And this, to me, as I said, is a central agenda for our profession. How do we make work better? And to get all philosophical on you, if you look at all the way from Aristotle through what's enshrined in the American Constitution and everything else, is happiness as a construct. Happiness. And Aristotle, for those of you who remember anything about Aristotle said, he said, humanity are the only species on Earth who are sentient, who can kind of see what the hell's going on, and therefore are capable of developing themselves for the future. And he said the thing that we must be working towards as an outcome of humanity is greater happiness. And he didn't mean that we should all own flat-screen TVs. He meant about meaning and purpose and collaboration and sharing and community and all those sorts of ideas. Enshrined in the American Constitution, the Dalai Lama talked about it as saying, it was either him or the Pope, one of those two great people, who said, I always forget which one, said something about, isn't it strange how in the world of work we're working harder and harder to earn more money in order to pay money to help us be well again by going through all this therapy and going to spa centers and all these other things. So something's wrong with that equation. There are national happiness indexes. Do you know which country is the happiest country on earth? Anybody know? Colombia. I hadn't heard that one before. It's probably up there somewhere. Denmark is now the happiest, most recently rated, but just before, a year or so before that, it was Bhutan. Anybody know where that is? Tiny little country in the middle of the Himalayas. I don't think there's a flat-screen TV between them, right? They are all about spirituality and meaning and stuff like that. That's why, apart from anything else, we can learn a lot from the Asian cultures. And I spent a lot of time in Asia. And I'm not some sort of deep philosophist, but I do think it's really interesting to think about the world more from, or as much from the point of view of humanity and collaboration and community and well-being as it is about the Anglo-Saxon model of measure the number and point to the output. And if you're not producing an output, then goodbye. Thank you very much for your time and your interest in my organization. And this is the stuff that we can profoundly impact as a profession. So people really are our most important assets. We haven't always thought about them that way, but they really are. Rethinking the workforce relationship. I mean, a lot of stuff I've talked about is embedded in many of these ideas now. About voice. I mentioned Gen Y, Gen Z. My generation, we grew up, we weren't given a voice. And we never really asked for one. We were just told to get on with the damn job. We kind of did. We had meaningless annual appraisal interviews. And I'm talking about a big professional services firm that did the stuff well. I can remember the daftness of the conversations even now. You sit there at the end of the year and you say, well, what were your objectives? Well, can't you remember them? I don't remember them. Oh, yeah, I wrote them 18 months ago and they've all changed. Oh, right, well, yeah, they've all changed. Yeah, because something you did change during the year and we didn't account for that. Oh, yeah, and then I wanted to give you some feedback. And so they give you some feedback. And then you say, yeah, but that wasn't me, or that was 6 months ago, wasn't it? I mean, yeah, we lived for that world. We thought this was okay. We had forced distributions and all these sorts of things. And nobody ever challenged it. And now, thank goodness, through some of this sort of stuff, we're challenging it. And the voice of the younger generation, I think in particular, is one of the reasons why a lot of this stuff is changing. They have come into the world of work and in many ways said, what the hell are you doing? Do you think it's okay to have an annual appraisal with me when you don't, and you're not giving me feedback all the time? Do you think that's okay? Of course it's not okay. Interestingly, also things like corporate social responsibility. I don't believe it was my generation that woke up one day and had an epiphany and said, oh my God, we must be more responsible businesses. It was a lot with Generation Y coming in and saying, you know what else do you stand for besides making money? What's your real purpose? And as I said before, this is a central idea and every institution should have it. And this is what drives, oh, I've already flipped to the next one. It's what drives our thinking in business today. So the nature of the employment relationship really shifting, and it's having a profound effect on a lot of the practices and processes we've had in HR, right? Like performance management. The line manager, I don't care what organization, what you call these people, vital role. Do you think academics are good at people management? Sorry, I didn't hear that loud enough. No, they're not. No, because typically, I mean, I've worked a lot with academics, and I've worked a lot with engineers or bankers, and they tend to be the same type of breed. They are celebrated and rewarded for their deep competence. How they get their chairs and all these other things, how they get promoted is not how well they manage their department or their team. It's how many citations they have, how good was their research, and sometimes how good was their teaching. And therefore, they don't see this stuff as important. You know, as I said, I was with Trinity College Dublin last week talking about a lot of this. I don't know if your heads of schools kind of rotate the job like it's Muggins's turn, but a lot of them do, right? They say, oh my God, I suppose I better do it. You know, but we have to shift that culture, don't we? Do you think that every line manager should have as a key element, and I say it could be a department head, anything, a key element of their job is looking after their people and trying to get more out of them and communicating with them appropriately and giving them feedback? Do you think that's a key job? Keep up the job? Yeah, I do. And yet, what have we talked about? We haven't talked about that stuff at every level. We've talked about leadership, up here, leadership. Yeah, well, leadership, actually, the very heart of leadership is about people management. And we have got to train all of our people. And as I said, the generations coming into work do not tolerate this stuff. They will not stay with you. Your junior teaching staff won't stay with you if they're being treated badly by their academics, or nobody's paying any attention to them. And that's one of the key things in all of this. Does anybody give a damn about who I am, what I do, what I think, where I'm going, harms to my well-being? And that's at the very heart of good people management, is do I care? Now you can help them by giving them information. You know, it's interesting, you can look at highly operational environments. Like I was talking to British Airways recently on this stuff. British Airways, you all know BA, I mean, fantastically operationally excellent business, and thank God they are, because what they do really well and they keep us safe. Operational excellence writ large. But they would acknowledge in that model that people hasn't figured very highly. And they're now saying, I've got to manage my people better. But I got line supervisors who are dealing with a shifting work, a team that's shifting all the time. They're coming in and out on shifts, they've got contractors coming in and out, a lot of different things going on. So they said, all right, well, why don't we just start to give them information? So they got a little app and they give the managers a bit of information. So you're starting the shift today, here are the people on your shift, here's how long they've worked, here's their most recent birthday, or here's some developmental thing they're working on. Just tell them, give them the information. And then they can start, and amazingly, it's a human thing, I suppose, you give me a bit of information and say, oh, great, okay. So then they walk up to their baggage handler and say, hey, Bill, how's it going? I see it was your birthday last week. How do you think that makes Bill feel? Really good. My boss even remembered my name. Hopefully the name was Bill and not George. They remembered my name, and they seemed to know something about me, like they cared. And it's such a simple principle. It's a fundamental human principle. And we have to work harder, I think, particularly in environments like with academics, because it's not top of their list. And yet it should be. How are you going to build a better faculty, better teaching, better sharing of knowledge and ideas and collaboration, all those things, if they're not doing that as part of their job? And I recognize it's not straightforward, but I really profoundly believe this is, no matter what function or section or sector you're in, this is vital. And then, a couple other thoughts, and then we'll open to some questions. I have mentioned this point, and I love Dilbert. You all know Dilbert, right? So here's old Dilbert. Here's the manager talking to Dilbert. You're not allowed to have internal phone lists on your wall. The manager says, there are excellent reasons for this, which I someday hope to know what they are. And then he goes to Catbert, the evil director, HR director, and says, they're getting suspicious about a random policy generator. Now, we all laugh about this stuff, but there's some real truth, as there always is in Dilbert, some real hard truth, that our world, and I made this point about paradigm shifts, our world in HR, not just HR, has been quite rule-bound. And a lot of people think of HR as the function that likes to say no, that writes lots of policies and rules. Would you agree? And let me give you some examples. I mean, I have been publicly saying, and I am going to do this, I'm going to burn as many of CIPD's HR policies as I can find. I'm going to burn them, because I think a lot of them are nonsense. And it's not just the CIPD. And incidentally, I've got to burn them in the car park because of health and safety regulations. Of course, you understand that. Just to be clear. So what are all these rules? Well, a good example is dress code. You probably don't have this in universities, you're a bit more liberal. But dress code is a very common one in many corporate worlds. And I would talk to the women who were joining the CIPD and they say, it's amazing. The first 10 minutes of me joining this organization, my induction, was to tell me what to wear. I said, well, look, you just arrived from another planet? Yeah, something like that. So this is a really interesting paradigm shift that we've got to create, which is we've got to think of our function as enabling, not as controlling. And that's true of so many corporate functions. We've got to enable people to do the right thing. And this has a very profound an important point. Incidentally, Aldous Huxley, somebody said to me the other day they'd never seen Dilbert and Aldous Huxley on the same slide, so a bit of a first for you. But Aldous Huxley said the worst enemy of life, freedom, and common decency is total anarchy, i.e. no rules. But the second worst enemy is total efficiency, i.e. too many rules. And we've tended to operate in terms of compliance and risk and all these other things, treating people as bad robots by writing rules. Now, I said before, you cannot change behavior by writing more rules, can you? How many of you remember the Milgram experiments of the 1960s, the studies of obedience? You remember this stuff? Electrocution experiments? Yeah? You can't do that stuff anymore because it's unethical. But do you know what it showed? How terrifying the results were? It showed that people, and I think the numbers are something like 2/3 or 70% of people were prepared to go through something like that and switch a dial to electrocute somebody they couldn't see to a lethal charge. If you remember the experiment? Now, what was going on there? Had they just recruited a bunch of insane people to do this? No, they weren't. They were just ordinary people. But what had happened is they put them into a rule-bound environment where they disassociated their own decision and responsibility. It's not me, it's them. And I'm just doing what I'm told to do. Does that ring any bells in terms of things like the global financial crisis, for example? What do you think all these bankers were doing? I mean, they were the very same bankers that would go home and do age concern or help out their local charity or whatever, look after their neighbor, and yet they go to work and they try to screw us all. And what are they doing? It's because they're in a world where the rules are like this is what we all do, we groupthink this way, this is how I'm rewarded, and I do not have responsibility for the outcome of my actions. And this is the model. And if you go read Roger Steer and his little book called Ethicability. It's not a very long book, it's a very good book. We're doing a lot of stuff with Roger because I really like his way of thinking. He says there are 3 ways of looking at this stuff. The lowest level is an ethics of obedience, a rule-bound world where they're the rules and all I've got to do is obey the rules. What stage of your life does that apply to? Childhood. And then they get to whatever it is. I can't remember how old my daughters were when they started to stop telling me all the rules, but probably around 8 or 9 or 10 or something, they start to think for themselves. And then you move up into an ethics of care, which is so at least I can understand my responsibility to the people that I can see around me. And then ethics of reason says at the highest order that actually I get my sense of responsibility to others I can't see. I've got a basic moral compass, and I'm going to make ethical judgments as a result of that, and my organization is going to expect that I do that. And I'm going to live to the organizational values and not just driving for short-term results. And this is a real paradox because we have grown up in a rule-bound world. It's been the Anglo-Saxon model of business, as I described at the very beginning. We've now got more and more risk in business and organizations, and people are saying, oh God, so for example, when we're working with the FRC, the Financial Reporting Council, and the FCA looking at the banking sector, they've recognized you can't change the behavior of the banks by writing more rules. The failure of the global financial crisis was not because we didn't write enough rules. It was arguably because we wrote too many. And that is a real paradox that we have to deal with. And we've got to, again, teach people about this stuff. And we've got to enable managers to let go of things, to trust, because you can't empower if you don't trust. And this rule-bound world says we don't trust. But you say that the Gen Zs are challenging this stuff already. Somebody was telling me the story the other day about their Gen Z child who's about 12 and had come back from school, and they were talking about where we're going to go on our family holiday. And then the child spoke up and said, so where's my voice in this conversation, right? Where's my input to this decision? And the mother looked and said, sorry? She said, we generally decide where to go and we'll all agree, right? And she said, no, I have a voice and I have an opinion and I want you to listen to it. And then she said, where are you learning this stuff? And it's in school. Teachers are teaching young people to think like that. And then they come into the world of work, and then all of a sudden they can't think like that. So, as I said, you are at the forefront in higher education of dealing with some of these trends in the younger worker. But I find this stuff fascinating and really important. So we've got to think about our processes and practices. How many of you are looking at performance? Well, I know higher education sort of slightly varies because it's quite a hard thing to do performance management and academics, isn't it? But how many of you are looking at the process? Many of you are looking at the process. Because what's happening a lot now is people are deconstructing the entire thing and going back to the basics. What is the purpose of performance management? What's the purpose of it? It's not a trick question. Purpose of performance management is to improve performance. But we haven't always been doing that, have we? We've written all this stuff and we ask people to document things and all the rest of it, and that's not improving performance. That is making us feel better because we think if somebody's performing really badly, then I can let them go because they've got the documentation that supports it. How many times have you ever done that in your professional career, let alone in higher education? The reality is this is about improving performance. So it's about the regular discussions and coaching and interaction between the manager and their team. It isn't about a damn process. The process gets in the way. So these are the sorts of things we have to think about, from best practice to best fit. The reality also is that we've spent far too much time and attention on saying, here's the manual of how to do this stuff, let's all go do it. Whether it's Ulrich Moles or any other damn thing. And it's true not just for HR, it's true in business in general. And we've got to drop that stuff and start to think for ourselves and innovate. What is the nature of my workforce, my organization, the culture I'm building, what I need for the future? What, therefore, then are the best things for me to do? And how do I do it? And the really exciting thing to me about our profession today is I'm seeing a lot more confidence and courage and sharper elbows because of the world I've described and saying, all right, let's go challenge this stuff. And they are. I ask HR audiences a lot about things like performance management, and I'm astonished the number of hands that now go up that a year ago wouldn't have even appeared. We are getting more confident, and we need to be, because the future is ours. The future is about people. And it is about, therefore, how we really understand the essence of what it means to develop and motivate and engage people. And it isn't by writing a bunch of dumb practices and processes just because they happen to be what everybody else has done for years. And the other one is about jobs, as I said, designing jobs, the future of work, those sorts of things, all a vital part of it. And then I'm not going to talk about that, two other quick thoughts to wrap it up. I talked a little bit about data, and it's a big subject, but I really do believe we've got to get better at this data. We've got to get better at the basic measures. We've got to understand outputs. We've got to understand the makeup of our workforce. Why do we have such big debates about headcount, for example? Do you know what your headcount is? Do you agree with your finance team what your headcount is? No. So we're working with the finance and accounting profession because it's just as important for them to understand this stuff. And you should work with your finance teams to say, let's agree what the numbers are. They're all important to us, and let's present them together. And we've got a whole program going on called Valuing Your Talent. If you're interested to map out what we think is the kind of dictionary and common definitions and case studies to share that knowledge about what good measurement and analytics are. And incidentally, do not get too confused by the big software vendors that tell you need a supercomputer. You don't. You just need the basic data, and do not worry if it's not 100% accurate. No information in any business is ever 100% accurate. Take what you've got, figure out what the problems are that are most important to your university or college, and then work back from that and say, here's some data that helps you understand that problem. End of. Doesn't have to be more complicated than that. So there's all of that. And then this other point I've also talked about, I'm a big believer that we've got to go back to the basic understanding of human and organizational behavior. It's the very root of HR. And yet, as I said, we've ignored a lot of stuff. All the stuff that Kahneman talks about, or Dan Pink talks about in his book, Drive, or the Surprising Truth About What Motivates Us, which you should also read, is stuff we've known for 20 years or more. It's just we haven't applied it. And now we've got behavioral economics, we've got fields like positive psychology. Anybody know what that is, otherwise known as? The science of happiness. And interestingly, you have to put positive in front of psychology to remind you that most of psychology is about the negative. So, all of that, and then to conclude, it comes together in this model and framework. So I've talked about a lot of different things, but the first thing is the changing context. This is our professional context. If we, as the HR profession, do not understand the trends in the workforce and the workplace and the nature of work itself, it isn't going to be the accountants that will tell us, or the marketeers, or the IT people. This is our professional context, and it's affecting you all in terms of the people you employ, your staff, your administrative staff, your academic staff. It's absolutely affecting your students and how they think, and we need to be engaged in those conversations as well. So that is the first thing. The second thing is on the right here, put the science back in. Look at neuroscience, read Kahneman, and go back to principles of motivation and learning and how people respond to stress and leadership and all these other things. It's all there. It's just we haven't paid enough attention to it. We've got to embed that more deeply. And interestingly, with academics, if they worry about leadership stuff, it's all a bunch of mumbo-jumbo. Show them the damn science, the neuroscience. Academics tend to get convinced when you show them science. So show science. It's the same with business leaders, interestingly. And then the number stuff on the left is say, yeah, it's a big space. Don't make it too complicated. Make sure you've got the basic data. Make sure you understand the problems you're addressing and work with the finance teams. And then the bottom one is have the courage to change stuff that doesn't work. Just because you've done it for years doesn't make it right. So my concluding thought on all of this is there has never been a more important or interesting time to be in HR. I think it's an incredible time for our profession. The contextual stuff, if you weren't convinced before, and I'm sure you know some of those things, demands that we step up as a profession. And we are getting pulled into all sorts of places at the moment, which is really fascinating. And this is our time and our opportunity. But we're going to have the confidence to go change stuff, to go challenge stuff, to get out of our sometimes lack of confidence and go make the world a better place. And the final part in all of that, therefore, is invest in ourselves more as a profession. We have been the cobbler's children. This is a learning opportunity for you all, but I want you to read stuff and get connected and go on Twitter. We have got to keep our skills more current. We have not invested in ourselves enough. We are the cobbler's children as a profession. I say this all the time. And we should, because we've got to understand this stuff. And any professional is ultimately about keeping your skills current as well. So I can see Dean is looking at me anxiously, so I've probably almost run out of time, but I'd be delighted if there are any sort of thoughts or questions, if you have any. Dean.